I'm Misha, a Helsinki-based R&B hip-hop producer artist. Right now I'm pretty much working on this Misha project, working with singers and rappers from the States and UK mostly. From my own collaborations so far, the biggest ones for me has been working with Oddisee, one of my favorite producer MCs. He featured on one of my albums called Nocturnal. Recently I worked with Lalah Hathaway. That was definitely one of the highlights for me lately. And then Navran from Moonchild. She was featuring on my last album, Radiant. Recently one remix with Talib Kweli, and I'm a big fan of Black Star, Talib Kweli and Mos Def project. So getting to hear Talib Kweli rapping on my production was like a dream come true. When I grew up, obviously everybody were listening to metal music, and my first band was a metal band. But pretty soon my friend played me some tracks from Wu-Tang Clan's album 36 Chambers of Shaolin, and that really blew my mind, and I went in the deep end of hip-hop music, and that's when I started rapping when I was 13 years old. I started producing a bit on the side for my own songs and my colleagues. I fully went into production more in 2015 while I was exchange student in Minneapolis. They had a school where you could get a diploma out of hip-hop. That was the time when I really went into producing and kind of launched this Misha project. I try to make timeless music, so I go back to 70s, 80s, 60s, trying to bring some of that flavor to this day, mix that with the modern sounds. Like I go back to these records from the 70s. I hope someday somebody 50 years later finds my song and say, hey, this is still fresh, it's timeless. Not thinking about what's popping right now. I mostly work inside the box, but I like to combine, like I have a few analog synthesizers, so I want to bring maybe one or two elements of analog sound to my production inside the box, and that already makes it a bit different than doing everything inside the box. I'm pretty much all about collaborations. Even if you look at my catalog, you see so many names on different songs, and just try to collaborate with artists from different genres, producers, musicians, singers, rappers. I'm based in Finland, and most of the artists that I work with, most of them are based in the US or UK or in Canada. So it's rare that we get to do sessions. Things get recorded in different places with different microphones. Some of them have great mics and preamps and compressors, and some might need a lot of processing from my side. I mean, usually the issue is with the sibilance. Does the high end of the vocal performance sound good? And can I boost that without it starting to sound bad? Soothe and de-esser, those actually are one of the first effects on my vocal chain. Soothe2 is probably one of my most used plugins. I usually have way too much bass in my mixdown, so at some point I started using Soothe as a part of my mastering chain as well, as a first plugin to control like the sub bass. But I use it very like subtly in the mastering chain. So today we're gonna take a listen of my recent release with me, my Finnish producer Kokabona, Joya Moi, who is a Dutch South African singer, and Derek McKenzie, probably most known from being a drummer of Jamiroquai. So yeah, this song, The Present, it started in London. We had a session with Derek McKenzie, the drummer. That's where we kind of laid down the foundation for this song. Joya Moi recorded her vocals in Amsterdam, where she based. I basically then finished the track here in Finland. And today I'm gonna show the vocal mixing session that I already had, like the mixed beat inside the session. So the vocal performance I received was pretty well recorded. Joya recorded at her home, but she sent me raw stems obviously, so there was a lot of processing for me to do. So yeah, basically when I went into this vocal mixing session, first thing I usually do is clean up the tracks and getting rid of the mouth clicks, for example. For that I tend to use Spiff. We can listen the lead track in separation before I applied Spiff.
Toes in my feet. Don't follow, just take the lead. There's no time like the present. No time, no time.
So you can hear the usual mouth clicks that appear in almost every vocal take. You could remove them manually, but since you have good tools for that, like Spiff, I start with this preset remove mouth clicks and then just play around with the depth, and then that's usually how I pretty much find the satisfying results for this job. I like to use it first in delta mode. Just to make sure what it's removing, so I won't be removing some consonants that I want to hear in the vocal presence. And usually the frequency range is there. I can hear it immediately when it removes the most annoying mouth clicks.
Toes in my feet. Don't follow, just take the lead. There's no time like the present.
Sometimes, maybe I change the frequency, but to be honest, like 99 times out of 100, I don't touch this. I just play around with the depth, and that does the job perfectly for me. And that's one of the first things I do. And then the vocal chain itself is a bit more complicated. So yeah, this is pretty typical vocal chain that I use for lead vocals. So first I have high shelf EQ cutting a bit above 7,000. And then I have the same one inverted at the end of the chain, just so the high frequencies don't get affected that much by the chain. But yeah, other than that, like the typical chain is I have EQs, getting rid of the low end, low mid and 3000 hertz before I go to Soothe to control the sibilance and a bit more of low mid frequencies. And then I have de-esser doing more job on the sibilance. And then I have my two compressors. The first one is a bit faster, that's picking up like the peaks. And then the second one is a bit slower one, doing like 3 to 4 decibels each. Trying to maintain some dynamics. I'm not a fan of super squashed music, so I think using two different ones has worked pretty well for me. And then I have like a EQ that emulates analog EQ, just boosting high shelf, everything above 10,000. And then I have a bit of a chorus effect and saturation. And at the end of a chain I have utility that makes it mono, so I have a bit of chorus, but I do it mono at the end. With the chorus I just try to make it sound a bit smoother without having like a stereo effect on the vocal. So this is my Soothe processing on the lead vocal track.
Toes in my feet. Don't follow, just take the lead.
If I listen to it on delta mode, it does more job on the low mid frequencies than the sibilance. Something specific for me that I use it a bit with a bit slower attack and release settings. I've experimented a bit with it when I use like harder settings, and it feels like the quality maintains better with a bit slower attack and release settings. I don't know if that's true, but that's something I kind of personally had the experience with. So it's usually around 6 and release around 2.6. And pretty much the same case when I use it on other instruments.
Out the safety nets, I didn't leave them in the past. There's no time like the present. No time, no time.
So the difference is pretty subtle, but where I personally hear the difference happening is in the low mid range and in the sibilance range as well. And especially when you play many tracks on top of each other, then these specific frequencies start fighting with each other. That's before going to apply crazy amount of compression or anything like that. Now we're just looking at the vocal mixing session. On the production session, I had Soothe also applied on the drums, like doing actually a lot of job on the hi-hat frequencies and bass a bit, but mostly like hi-hats and guitar, where you have these nasty frequencies in 3K and 7/8K as well. So yeah, this is pretty much how I use Soothe2 and Spiff in my mixing projects, especially on the vocal mixing sessions that we looked today. Thanks for watching, and go check out the song. It's called The Present. It's by me. My name was Misha, and other artists on the track is Cocabona, Joy Amoy, and Derek McKenzie of Jamiroquai. Go check it out, The Present, and thanks for watching. Peace.